Well, let's put out in kind of in the shared field the artifacts. The way I tell the story of the little bang, because I think that really helps ground. And it creates a very specific grounding, makes it easier for people who don't necessarily. This is super not obvious, so let's just make it a little bit more explicit. So the story, as I understand it, is something like you've got these hominids, these primates, who are zipping about, and something shows up. This is exactly the way I told it in our conversation. Let's say it's food, because it's a pretty likely food, maybe mating, but let's go with food for now. And the gaggle, right, which is a natural piece of humanness, right? The social primates are all about being able to gaggle, right? Because obviously being able to orient your attention 50% on your first person experience and call it 50% on everybody else's attentional orientation is a force multiplier and the ability to explore complex environments fluidly and with subtlety and nuance, right? That's the whole distributed cognition thing, like the scene capacity, all right? Now, one of us encounters food. That one begins to shift into a get food mode, right? Food means eat. Everybody else's attention orients towards that shift in disposition, orients towards the food. Now there's everybody heading towards the food. Right? Now, every time this story is told up until this moment, the little bang, shit gets a little out of control. Right? Because now the only way to resolve the magnitude of desire for the food over the amount of food available to satisfy that desire is something like ordinary primate dominance hierarchy structures. Right? So there's going to be a lot of screaming and fighting and biting, all kinds of crap, some of which might be quite intense depending on the context. Right? There maybe we may all be really hungry, right? Because desertification has been going on, and there's like a serious, like if those two don't eat, may not make it, right? So stakes are high. The point being that in the GA story, in which I feel very good about, like as a strong hypothesis to operate under, is that something happens where a sort of a popping occurs. A movement occurs in the interior of one of these primates that has like a shifting from being choices strictly being dominated by the logic of the evolutionary lineage that brought us to that moment, right? Just a reactive replaying of the same game, the same dynamic. And in this case, choice emerges as a possibility, right? An actual choice is made. And that choice is at the very beginning, like this, almost I would imagine like this, which by the way, interestingly enough, I mean, for those of you who have taken psychedelics, probably is pretty fucking similar, right? That whoa, like a pop of wow, shit, some whole new aspect of reality just became present in my experiential field. And part of that aspect of reality is, what the fuck's going on? Like almost like something's happening. Like, maybe not even pointing at the food, but like, whoa, fuck, guys, we're here. So like that, like you can imagine. And that begins the process, right? But the key there is that moment from my point of view is the moment of what we call the sacred, right? Because this is the presencing in the GA language. And again, I'm sort of operating from that place, is the presencing of peace by virtue of choice. The capacity to begin the process of using our agency to create the possibility of peace, to create a possibility of a new way of behaving with each other in the world than the law, red in tooth and claw, right? That's the essence, like the bottom of sacred is that, right? Which some might call the presence of the kingdom of heaven on earth, right? This whoa, peace. We can have this thing, peace, and then it becomes a problem. And there's a conflict. There's a dynamic. How good are we at waging peace? Not very good. What does that mean? Well, the guy who stopped didn't get the fucking food and he died. But the others got the picture and it began to percolate through, right? So now we're a long time after that. We constantly go through these cycles where in the space of peace, by the way, so no, sorry, I'm now grabbing the conch and running a little bit too far. But in the space of peace, one of the things that happens is our capacity and competence for collaboration goes way, way up. But in a field that is dominated still by basic primate characteristics and the cultural logic of win-lose games, we end up subordinating our capacity for innovation to ultimately generate forms of selective competitive advantage. Right? So we have still yoked peace to war. At the end of the day, in us, peace all too often, almost always, is still subservient to war. And we can talk about all kinds of historical, economic reasons why that would be the case. And we can talk about one of the reasons why the fifth joint point is happening is that that is no longer valid. Right? I've said this in the past. It's like we're now at a moment where the story that has been told many, many times isn't like a nice to have. It's a must have. Right? If we do not learn how to make peace the ground, and conflict is now happening in the context of peace, if we continue to operate with peace as a subordinate to war, the game's over. This particular story terminates. So we're in this really interesting spot where the essence, the energy of that Big Bang would be this actual, the way I'm visually seeing it is like a sphere that inverts on itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, the figure background relation. Rotates 180.
The figure background relation is the thing that emerges on the originary scene for the first time. Is a foreground and a background, the object and the periphery. And that center periphery relation is very fundamental in GA because it is, in some sense, the relation of the social order writ large at all times. I mean, Jordan's already speaking in terms of the center and the scene in this Zoom call and in the world. This is a fractal kind of relationship. And what you pointed to, Jordan, as well, with the kind of, the firstness, right? That hominid that sort of hesitated and sort of experienced that something like awe. Who knows? We don't want to sort of put categories of cognition that we have today on those. We have to be sort of very careful how we draw that out. But hesitated. I mean, that is the origin of free will, right? And we can talk about exactly what that means. And it's both radically free and constrained by the scene, obviously. And so it's this kind of strange combination, but agency develops. Religion, I mean, that notion of peace, which you're drawing out all those theological implications for, that is what happens on the scene as well. And so in generative anthropology, we always kind of want to return to the scene and try to draw out things from there and sort of narrate that evolution. Yeah.
Right. And that originary scene, the way I read it quickly, is essentially people are gathering around like a mammoth, a major sort of task that requires systematic coordination.
Object,
and then all of a sudden there's a gesture process that then affords the capacity for this collective, to become, wait a minute, there's a collective shared, almost super-organism kind of framing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, exactly. And it's kind of the originary feast, right? You share food together. And think about on Thanksgiving, on Christmas, what do? We gather around, we all wait patiently, and then we slowly divide up the food safely. And if you don't, it's strange.
Right, you cut into the turkey before, people are like, what the fuck?
Right, what are you doing? You've done something profane. I mean, you're still on the scene in many ways. And even Christmas, right? You tear apart these gifts and this kind of strange sacral relation of the center and the periphery. So we're never escaping these kind of dynamics. But to Jordan's point, we can have more sophisticated ways of thinking through them, and we can become aware of them, right? And this is the kind of historicity, is the modes of language are different than they were on the evolutionary scene, right? We're talking about it, we're aware of it. And so this is the creative dimension, the ongoing creation that is possible. And this is why, by the way, Girard is in some sense, all Girard can give you at some level is the scapegoating mechanism. And it paradoxically kind of turns you into a scapegoat because all you can do is kind of point out the mechanism when you see it. Generative anthropology is this kind of creative dimension, which is what humans are capable of. And yeah.